You were talking about Venezuela as a good example of the usability of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, but Nicolas Maduro cracked down on the Bitcoin exchanges and at the same time create the Petro. So it seems to me that also the governments can make untrustable cryptocurrency. What will be your vision about that?
Yes, absolutely. I think, it's not just governments that could create untrustable cryptocurrency. I think there are a lot of untrustable cryptocurrencies out there right now. Obviously, there are over 1,600, I think maybe even more, but at one point 1,600, and I certainly wouldn't trust many of those, and nor would I trust the Petro.
I would like to ask you, Katie was talking about, maybe it's like asking Netflix when we were having the first stages of the internet. What about that maybe your skepticism is because the technology is still advancing and is in a very early stage?
Okay, the question would be, and of course I could be wrong, but the point, now I was surprised at how far the internet went. There was never a question, is there anything this is good for? I mean, email, transfer of documents, those were there right from the beginning. There was, the internet comes out of ARPANET. It comes out of stuff that was meant to be, to serve some obviously useful function. And it's true that I think some of us, me included, I certainly underestimated. I didn't, there was a substantial period when it seemed to be mostly cat videos, and then and has gone beyond that, obviously. And in fact, I'm a heavy user. But the question is, are we even? It was clear right from the beginning that there were things you could do with the internet that you couldn't do otherwise. I mean, I was filing magazine columns on black and green glowing screens right from the very beginning. It's not at all clear even now that there's anything that you can do with crypto that you can't do other ways. But obviously, if something comes along that I'm happy to see it, but I don't see it now.
Katie, Paul was talking about if there is no consensus in terms of the value, for example, of Bitcoin, tomorrow everybody wake up and say, I don't care about Bitcoin. There is not an intrinsic value. If there is no consensus in terms of the value of Bitcoin, and tomorrow everyone wake up and say, I don't care about Bitcoin, there is not an intrinsic value, like it's with the gold that you can transform it.
It's been around 10 years now. I think that I found more weight to those arguments earlier in the very early days. I think now what we're seeing is the volatility is lessening, and I grant you, there's still a lot of volatility. I think things like stable coins are really interesting and really important to this ecosystem to hedge against that volatility.
Can I just want to weigh in? I've never been one to, I think that the price fluctuations, although they certainly inhibit its usability as a store of value, I would say the interesting thing is it's now 10 years old and still has very little application in the actual payment system. I was trying to, the data aren't so great, but it looks like there's something like 500 million to $1 billion worth of transactions a day in Bitcoin, which is, if you're accustomed to economic numbers, that is tiny. The foreign exchange market has just the US dollar foreign exchange market has $1 trillion of transactions every day. And as best we can tell, the dollar value of Bitcoin transactions peaked at the beginning of this year and has actually fallen substantially since then. There's very little sign that it is becoming any kind of widespread means of payment. And that's 10 years on. So when is that going to happen?
Well, I have a couple of responses to that. The transaction volume going down came at a time when the protocol was undergoing a very big change. Okay. So I think there is that, and that must be acknowledged. Also, yes, it's 10 years. Satoshi's white paper was in 2008. But if you think about when people started really hearing more and more about Bitcoin, it was substantially later. And even those of us who were in the government or some more mainstream institutions, in 2012, 2013, we're still thinking of this as kind of criminal. I mean, you heard my presentation. Yeah. That was the thinking in the early days. I think that thinking is changing among more traditional sectors. I mean, I've seen it a bit myself. My evidence is obviously very anecdotal and firsthand, but I think right now what we're seeing is, there are alternatives for payment. It certainly hasn't achieved Satoshi's white paper says it's an electronic peer-to-peer cashless system and for payments. Right. For payments, and I would grant you that it's right now, its main use is certainly not that. However, Bitcoin Cash is trying to do that. The reason Bitcoin's been held back is the scale, aside from volatility, is the scaling, right? And right now you have things like the Lightning Network, which are being built. And the Lightning Network is aiming to increase the ability to use Bitcoin for payments. And maybe it won't be Bitcoin that will be for payments. Maybe it will be another cryptocurrency. I don't know. But I think that others are definitely in the works. More energy efficient ones I know of now that are being developed and have actually already been launched.
Well, that brings me back. I think basically, at least as Bitcoin is structured, and I have to admit, I have some trouble keeping up with all this stuff, but Bitcoin is what people are owning now in large values, and any gains in energy efficiency just gets swallowed up very quickly. You just push further into that margin, and it's a self-defeating form of progress. Other things, maybe there's some way to make this, but I don't know. I don't understand how you make the validation system work without basically paying people to validate, and that means one way or another using a lot of real resources to validate it.
Sorry. If there is a consensus in terms of the validation, and there is no value in terms of the validation itself, but by the consensus and the value that the network put on the system, on the own system.
Well, but the validation, someone has to be investing the resources in effect to say that this token I've received is a real one. And I know that I don't actually know. I mostly know that the dollar bill in my wallet is a real one because it's a little bit hard to reproduce. But mostly the main obstacle to people producing high quality counterfeit dollar bills is the fact that the Treasury Department, the Secret Service will track you down. And the whole point of cryptocurrencies is supposed to be that we don't need to have the Secret Service enforcing the validate. But that means that you have to have something else doing it, which means real resources.
I actually think, though, about the Secret Service will track you down, I actually disagree with that. And I think it is relatively easy to counterfeit with the modern technology, to counterfeit dollar bills. I mean, I saw this as a prosecutor. There's so much counterfeit cash out there. And I'm just talking about the U.S. now, not other economies. But the fact of the matter is the resources are so strapped. The Secret Service, in particular, is an agency so strapped that I can't tell you how many counterfeiters we could never prosecute. It's such a small fraction of cases that you really have a Secret Service agent. It has to be a mass scale counterfeit. It's just not the case that, if someone counterfeits $100,000 that the Secret Service is going to go investigate them. And even less chance that they're then going to bring them to one of my old colleagues to prosecute. Well, so there is that. I do want to just make that point because I do think there is thinking out there that differs from the realities of what the government can and can't do to prosecute, Unfortunately, the government doesn't hurt for business where it comes to crimes.
Katie, what about the inflation that it comes from the forking? Because that also you need a consensus in terms of not making forking, but sometimes it happens. Yep. And that is a big, not contrafering, but a big problem in itself by the own system.
Sure. I mean, forking can be sometimes a good thing. It can be sometimes a bad thing. I mean, if you have too many forks and you have too many systems and everything's splintering off, you lose something there, I suppose, in some cases. But I do think that right now another move we're seeing is Bitcoin relies on proof of work for mining. And we've been talking a lot about the energy consumption that's going on with that. And now you see Ethereum, which is, I guess, I think it's still the second largest by market capitalization of cryptocurrency. Ethereum is migrating to what's called a proof of stake. So it won't be doing proof of work mining and using all of this energy. Other cryptocurrencies are now coming out with something called delegated proof of stake. And there's even, I could go on and on, there are lots of different consensus mechanisms out there that people all over the world, not just in Silicon Valley, I mean, it's happening all over the place, are working on.
Well,
So.
you know, it's maybe, but it's you know, again, all right, I'll just come back to my point, which is that we developed this, you know, socially ingenious thing, which is enduring institutions that have a reputational stake in safeguarding the value of the tokens they create, and we're throwing all of that out, and it's going to be really, really hard to come up with something that's better. We're getting rid of basically getting rid of the future as a way to make the present work is a really peculiar thing to be doing.
Wouldn't you say that there is incentives by the governments and regulators to make blockchain technology, as we are seeing also in Venezuela, that there is a big incentive in terms of the government to have some whatever, but that coming from the government it can work?
Well, you know, if people really do believe in crypto and can be easily convinced, then there's money to be made. And some government's going to say, well, you know, seigniorage, this wonderful old term from the fee that the Lord collected for minting coins. Seigniorage, hyperinflations happen because governments are unable to raise resources other ways, and they turn to seigniorage and start printing. But even governments that don't do that collect some seigniorage. The U.S., you know, get the gradual expansion of currency and circulation gives the U.S. government some tens of billions of dollars of revenue. You can imagine that governments, if they start to see the seigniorage eroded by crypto, will say, okay, well, we'll offer you government-validated crypto, which, not sure at some point why that's any better than government-validated other stuff, but they might want to do it. The other thing to remember is that government officials are as you know, they read the same magazines. Nobody reads magazines. They read the same social media as everyone else, and want to be trendy. And you know, the trendiness is a very big factor in all of this.
And Katie, Paul says something very interesting about there are billions of people that have not access to internet. So how is the Bitcoin or the cryptocurrency technology is going to work for them? Because we're still very far from having ubiquitous internet.
Right now, what you're seeing is the explosion of cheap mobile phones. Right now, it's less than $30 to get a mobile phone. And I mean, we saw this, what I would call a leapfrogging effect, happen with landlines in places like Africa or other rural areas in the world. And I think you are seeing that a bit. You know, these families or people, they don't have computers, but they have mobile phones. And now a lot of these cryptocurrency exchanges, or if you want to call them dApps, decentralized applications, some of them even have a desktop version. You can only use them on mobile. And so I think this is really interesting, and I think there could be this leapfrogging effect because, of course, not everyone has access to a computer or...
Right. But then my question is, why can't you just have mobile phone banking, also extremely low cost? I don't really understand why crypto solves, why something that is much more conventional doesn't solve the same problem. Now, I agree that the mobile phone thing is amazing. That's a technology that went from nothing to ubiquitous. And
I mean, there are some problems with centralization. There are some problems with decentralization. I'll give you a personal example. Ironic, I was, banking application. I think you would consider PayPal a banking application. You know, when I was with the government, I had to go overseas to investigate a money laundering case. And my PayPal account was frozen. Why? Because they thought, they suspected me. I think I was in Poland or something. And I tried to call, you can't get through, you can't. This is very frustrating. So there is this element also of mobile banking. I actually don't find mobile banking so frictionless. This is anecdotal. It's just based on my own personal experience. But I think just the millennial, also look at millennials, their confidence level in banks and financial institutions and government institutions is at an all-time low. And so I think there are a lot of people, there was a study I saw and I can't cite you the source, but it said that 1 out of 3, and this is in the United States, 1 out of 3 millennials would rather own Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies than stocks. That's pretty interesting. I do think that there is something there with this millennial generation. But to answer your question just directly about online banking, it's still just a copy of something. The other thing I think, and I think about this as a former cybercrime prosecutor, centralization to me equals honeypot. Let's go hack, because it's one single place. We can all go hack into it. The blockchain has never been hacked. Of course, now people will say, yes, it has. The exchanges have, to be sure. Several exchanges have. And that's a problem. Those are those on and off ramps. And absolutely, I mean, that's a concern. It's a concern. I sit on the board of one of the world's biggest cryptocurrency exchanges, and I'm on our audit committee. Obviously, security is something we take very seriously there, but not all, the majority of cryptocurrency exchanges have not been hacked. But I'm talking more about the decentralized blockchain. So you do have this centralization problem with banks, in my opinion.
Well, I was just saying that, but the fact that the exchanges, the fact that they exist is a way of saying, look, people in fact need something centralized even to use the blockchain. And that creates, so I mean, it's not clear that you've done anything except displace that problem from one place to another.
Well, that's a fair point, except I would tell you, what about DEXs or decentralized exchanges? Those, if you talk to people who are really deep in the crypto weeds, a lot of them will tell you decentralized exchanges are really the way of the future and they're coming online. So, I mean, time will tell, but the point is these, as you pointed out, it's hard to keep up because these technologies keep changing so quickly. I found this in the government. Just when we thought we had figured out Bitcoin, there was Ethereum, then there was Litecoin, then there's, now fast forward, you've got threshold relays, you've got all of this technology. It's very hard to keep on top of what's what. But I do think that people are very excited about the promise of decentralized exchanges.
Well,
de este lado, por favor.
Yeah, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and Kyo for sponsoring this. So I happen to work in the digital currency space in Mexico, and I wanted to put a few things into perspective. As Katie mentioned, not everyone had or lives in the same conditions as you guys do in the United States. And Mexico is a country that particularly suffers hard from financial inclusion. We have about 45 million people in the country that have banking. We have about 100 million mobile cell phone lines, mostly achieved through these very cheap mobile phones that Katie was talking about. We have about 120 million people or so that live in the country. There are currently more people in Mexico that own cryptocurrencies than people in Mexico that have shares of a publicly traded company in Mexico.
Wow.
And to your question, Paul, on what things can you do with crypto that you cannot do with the current financial system, we happen to see a lot of those. And most of them come from individuals that don't have good access to financial services in Mexico. We have hundreds of thousands of users who use cryptocurrencies today to make cross-border payments. A lot of these payments are tiny. And I would like to ask you, what other way could an 18-year-old Mexican who doesn't have a bank account and doesn't have a debit card or a credit card have to make a $10 payment to a video gaming provider in the United States? Today, that's something that is 100% possible via cryptocurrencies and one of the biggest use cases of our particular business.
it would be, I mean, I have to say, there's an interesting question. Why? I mean, there are lots of ways that micropayments could be enabled, and the question of why, I'll take it as a given. I don't know this I haven't studied it. I'll take it that there are not alternatives to crypto, but then I'd be asking why. Why would we be using these very elaborate systems when it should be a fairly simple thing, a fairly simple business? And I just want to know, particularly I'd want to know exactly what it is. An awful lot, I'll just give you a generic statement, which may not, may be unfair in its implication, but the high tide of financial innovation in other respects, non-crypto financial innovation was in the period roughly 2000 to 2007, and the great bulk of that innovation was essentially just doing an end run around regulations. And the question you want to ask is what is it? What are the rules that are being sidestepped here? And maybe crypto is really the best solution, or maybe for good or bad reasons the other ones are simply being ruled out, and they haven't figured out a way to crack down on the crypto yet.
Thank you. De este lado, por favor.
I have a common view with him, because the progress of history has made central banking centralized. Maybe in the United States you don't have this problem as other countries have, when they have to value their money against the dollar. And how the reputation of central banks is important, because central banks have more information than particular users. And that's why they are more trustworthy. And maybe the Americans have mostly said, I print dollars and everybody will accept them. I think Trump is getting to that point when he says, hey, I want to diminish exchange deficits. And that is something I see in cryptocurrencies that are just trying to get into a path where we have already gone. You will end up centralizing. And in the longer term, you will diminish the possibilities of exchange if you keep doing it like that, because there's no much. The trust is not so much into a smaller player than to a bigger player. But I think there's another big question to be asked here. The world has not stated or said a response to what is a different source of value or store of value than the dollar. And that is a question that is making Bitcoin. So I would like your opinion on that.
Would you like to begin, Katie, in terms of the going back in?
Yeah, sure, but I just want to make sure I understand the question, and I don't.
Yeah, in terms of, I guess his idea is.
I mean, I understood what you
yeah.
were saying. I just am not sure what the question to me is.
Yeah, in terms of going back.
Why do you think the world should change into Bitcoin if you're going backwards?
By the way, if I can say, it may be that sitting here, the hegemony of the dollar looks larger than it really is. I mean, the dollar is only one of dozens of currencies that people really do trust. It's no one is sitting in Switzerland says, well, francs aren't real money. It's only dollars that are money. Nobody sitting in Sweden thinks krona are not real money. The dollar has a special role as a global key currency, but that's mostly not. That's mostly actually its economies of scale. There's so many more transactions vis-a-vis the dollar than anyone else that it's cheaper, and that kind of logic is going to apply. If cryptocurrency makes it better than I think it will apply to cryptocurrencies as well. There will not be 1,600 cryptocurrencies out there. There will be one or two. Which is also, by the way, why I don't believe that blockchain is going to undermine Amazon or any of these people, because the reason I use Amazon is not because of power or not the power of Amazon, but the power of laziness, right? It is just so much easier to just click on that one, and it's because everyone else does it, and that's. I mean, in a way, the money is all about the power of laziness. It's about not having to think too much about what this thing is. It's $1, so I can use it.
Yeah. My brother works at Amazon, and we have this debate all the time because there are projects like Filecoin out there. But I would just say, I don't think there would only be a couple cryptocurrencies that succeed. I do agree with you that it will not be 1,600. I think you might see, I don't want to put a number on it, but I think you'll see several emerge as ones that are going to stick around. I don't think, though, to answer your question, that it's going to replace all of the other currencies. I'm not saying that, oh, it's going to replace the dollar and replace the euro. I actually don't believe that is likely to happen. I also don't believe it's going to replace gold as a store of value entirely. And if I suggested that during my presentation, all I meant to suggest was that I think it will develop as an alternative store of value.
De este lado, por favor. Si no,
Hi. My question is, as you have mentioned, there are a lot of cryptocurrencies. So if tomorrow I decide to open my own currency, let's say it's called Carla Coin, and I say it's going to have a capitalization of $1 million, what really makes the value for that? I don't have that money. Where is the money coming from? And if I tell people, oh yeah, come join my crypto, where is the money really coming from? Because in the end, when you go into an exchange, you put money, and that money is either coming from cash or from your credit card or your debit card. So my question is, who is backing that money?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. There's probably already a Carla coin out there.
Well, there are, in fact, this is not a hypothetical, right?
Yeah.
Dogecoin, all of these things are.
Well, if you watched John Oliver about Dogecoin, that's funny.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, and one thing I wanted to include in the affirmative presentation that I obviously ran over, but look, initial coin offerings or ICOs, I'll be the first to tell you there is a tremendous amount. The majority of them seem to be frauds or scams. So when you're saying that, there's nothing there and you're just launching a coin and where's this money coming from, that's happening today. Okay, and it's happening in large numbers today. It was $7 billion in ICO initial coin offerings. And my number might be outdated because the year's gone on since I looked. But it's something like $7-8 billion already this year alone. After, by the way, international securities regulators have started saying, watch out, okay? So the answer is, where is the money coming from? It's coming from, in some cases, mom and pop investors. It's crowdfunding, right? It can come from anywhere. So I would say, absolutely, you have two people or one person with a white paper and they raise $1 million. We've seen that a lot. And people are saying, oh, it's cryptocurrency. I want in. I want a piece of the future. And I'm going to be on the early Carla coin. Bitcoin is already too expensive, right?
My barber actually did ask me if he should put all of his money in Bitcoin. So this stuff is not hypothetical. It's for real. And there's a lot of uninformed people getting ripped off.
Yeah, and look, so the SEC in the U.S. and certainly regulators in other countries are taking a really hard look at this. And I hear all the time, well, why isn't the SEC cracking down? And I said, just wait, because the government moves slowly but surely. And they say, well, these projects are just getting a pass and they're clear frauds or scams. And I would say, much like Secret Service, they can't do every case, number one. So a lot of those scams are going to get a pass. But number two, I predict we are going to see a lot of enforcement actions against fraudulent, scammy ICOs. And good, because they bring down the name and reputation and value of other legitimate projects in the space. Because there are some token offerings. Remember, I talked to you tonight about crypto networks. There are some really amazing projects in there. Some product that's built, not just simply the promise of it on a white paper. And not everyone does that. And that's why you hear regulators across the world saying, do your own research. And again, I'd be the first to admit that there is just a ton of fraud and scam going on, especially where ICOs are concerned. There are also some real diamonds in there. Just like I hate to sound like a broken record, like in the early days of the web, think of all the scammy.com businesses that had nothing really innovative or useful to offer, that were really just frauds.
De este lado.
If we are now in the early stages of this vast network, governments will seek to regulate it. What is your take on the positions that the governments will take? Will they promote the existence of this new way of trading to make the old style more efficient, or will they try to protect the establishment and hinder the use of these new technologies?
Yeah, I guess I'm having trouble with the premise that the old style was inefficient. For people who now, this is an interesting question about people who are unbanked and so on. But for middle class individuals, for corporations, the system in fact works as it is. What is it that they don't need a new means of payment? What governments need to do is crack down on fraud, and I don't know if it was really if I'm all wrong and crypto really proves to be a better way of doing transactions. I suspect in the end, at least advanced country governments won't have a problem with it. The financial institutions will find ways to most of them to thrive in that environment, and when governments, advanced country governments, don't need the seigniorage. The U.S. government doesn't rely on printing money to pay its bills, so they'd be more or less indifferent. My guess is, however, that I don't actually believe that we're at the dawn of a new age. I actually believe that we're at that most of this 10 years back, 15 years from now, it will look a lot like pets.com.
We'll need to get you some cryptocurrency to make that bet. But to answer your question, I think governments are taking really different approaches, right? Some we're seeing ban it completely. Others we're seeing completely embrace it, and then you have some that are in the middle. Let me talk about right now, Dubai, for example, is one that's really embracing it. Dubai says it will be a blockchain-powered nation by 2020. And they estimate that they will save billions of dollars a year in man hours by putting all kinds of licensing applications on the blockchain. This project is already underway, by the way. You can Google it. Just Google Dubai blockchain nation. So they're going all in there on the blockchain. You have then Malta is trying to become a haven for blockchain or cryptocurrency projects, trying to attract a lot of them there. In fact, one of the biggest exchanges, and maybe Binance is the biggest exchange by volume in the world, is Binance, and they relocated from China to Malta as part of this. Then you have China on the other end of the spectrum. And then I would put the United States and I would put Mexico and Japan somewhat in the middle. They're taking a wait-and-see approach. They're certainly not taking a complete hands-off approach. We saw FinCEN in the Treasury, in the U.S. Treasury, say, as you saw me reference during my presentation, no, cryptocurrency, you're also subject to all of the same Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering regulations that any bank is. So they've already made clear that some of the regulations still apply just the same. And Japan passed a new cryptocurrency law a year ago in April, combining elements of some traditional anti-money laundering, but bringing about some new, unique to cryptocurrency. And there's a lot of cybersecurity protections in there for some of the reasons you say. Some of the exchanges where there were hacks were happening in Japan. So I think different governments and different regulators, it's all over the map. I can speak to in the U.S., almost every agency now has a working group on these technologies.
Do you think that the tendency is to resist it or to promote it?
It totally depends. I mean, just speaking of, I founded the government's first cryptocurrency task force. And it was the Justice Department, but a bunch of other agencies, from Treasury to, in the U.S., obviously. But then state and locals joined, and we had Secret Service and Treasury and IRS and everyone. And now there are numerous of those task forces around the country. And some have a view that cryptocurrency is completely illegal. I mean, some of my ex-colleagues in the Justice Department think it's still completely criminal. Others think this is the next thing, and I have to go leave and get into this space. And then there's a middle ground who think there are some neat applications and there are also some problems that we see. So I just think the governments are made up of people and people all have different opinions. And I've seen that really reflected in the different regulatory agencies. I would say, though, that you have some that are thinking a lot more about it and have a lot more subject matter expertise. In the U.S., the SEC is a great example. They have a crypto czar, Val Stepanek. She's got a degree in engineering and computer science, and she is the head of all crypto things for the SEC. And she really understands the technology. And I think she's very balanced. I don't think she seeks to either promote nor curb it. I think she wants to see projects done in a lawful way. One of the things at Coinbase that we always say is responsible innovation. And Coinbase is a great example because when they were just starting out that company in San Francisco in 2012, they were told by their lawyers, big law firm, don't worry about getting those licenses, you don't need them. They fired those lawyers, and they said about the painful process of getting individual, in the United States, they have it hard there because they had to get 50 individual licenses from every state. And they did that because they thought if this is to go mainstream, we want to do this in a responsible way.
¿Nos da tiempo todavía para una pregunta más?
Hi. I wanted to thank you both for being here and for the interesting conversation. And I had a question for you, Catherine. I read a post by Linda from Scalar Capital where she made the argument that Bitcoin is sort of like a poor form of payment because of the fact that it's pseudo-anonymous. And if you had a way to link your real identity to a public key, you would be able to find out how much money a given person has. So I was wondering if you think that that will mean the privacy coins will actually become the default payment tokens, or you think public blockchains such as Ethereum and Bitcoin will adapt security layers on top?
Very good question. The second part, I don't know. We'll see if they do. I think if the demand is there, entrepreneurs will try and developers will try to build those services. In terms of your question on privacy coins are very interesting. The two leading examples, I think, of privacy coins are Zcash and Monero. And it's interesting because if you talk to the folks at JP Morgan, I know Jamie Dimon is famously quoted as saying Bitcoin is a fraud. I actually got to discuss that when he came to Stanford and got to ask him some questions around that. The interesting thing is at the time, now he was making his comments unique to Bitcoin, JP Morgan was inking a huge deal with Zcash. Zcash, the privacy coin. So it's not that JP Morgan completely thought cryptocurrency, there was no there there. They were doing a partnership with Zcash. And the reason they were doing a partnership with Zcash is because of the reasons you just mentioned in Linda Shea's post. Because there needs to be financial privacy, especially in the case of businesses, right? One business doesn't want its competitor to see what it's paying or charging customers. And that's where Zcash comes in for that really commercial use. So as to whether or not Bitcoin or Ethereum build privacy-enhancing features, I don't know.
Have you something changed in your point of view after listening to Katie?
I want to do some homework on the. I think my fundamental view has not changed, but I think the question of low-income, unbanked people making payments, that's a subject I haven't studied, and it is interesting that should be a use for crypto. Now, I'm a little puzzled by it, and so that's a new fact that I need to figure out where it fits in. I still the basic. My basic argument really is not very dependent on the details, but this is one piece that is somewhat, at least, I was going to say that when you hit a real anomaly in what you think is a well-established point of view, you should study it, and most of the time the explanation turns out to be bad data, but I'm definitely going to look into this. And this was the best, far and away the best defense of crypto that I've heard.